The Drum, the Doll, and the Zombie by Brad Strickland and John Bellairs, Chapter 13. For heaven's sake, Roderick, said Dr. Coote anxiously as the two men stood in the empty, echoing room. Get a grip on yourself, please. I don't feel very strong, and I've never been good at facing danger. I have weak legs. Don't you understand? Wailed Professor Childermass, weeping wretchedly. I have given those two boys to a monster. Who knows what he may... He began to sob again. Dr. Coote grabbed the professor by both shoulders and shook him feebly. It did no good. Very well, Dr. Coote said at last, his voice dripping with scorn. Be a big crybaby. I am going to help the boys. You can stay here and snivel, you pompous, swaggering old windbag. Professor Childermass's face flamed red. At once his outrage boiled in his eyes. How dare you insult me, Charlie, he demanded. If this is the thanks I get for stuffing your shabby soul back into your miserable Episcopalian carcass, then I wish I'd just let old slimy scales take the fool thing. I have never been addressed that way in my entire life. He raised his fists and began to dance around the bare floor like Jack Dempsey, the great heavyweight boxer. I'll fight you now or later. I'll flatten you like a pin pricking a soap bubble. Get ready to taste canvas, you palooka, you. Good, snorted Dr. Coote, turning his back and hobbling away toward the stairs. If you are angry, you are at least in the mood to do something. Right now, you can help me upstairs so I can get some decent clothes on. Next, we will see about rescuing those boys, and when we finish that, you can floor me with your haymaker if you think you can, you old pot-bellied buzzard. Professor Childermass was so angry he could not speak. He glared at the evil voodoo design on the floor, and then he began to do a furious tap dance to it, kicking puffs and swaths of colored meal this way and that. He began to rage. Take that and that, you miserable, misbegotten magical markings. I'll snuff you out one by one. And then he went tearing around the room, ripping the idols and masks off the walls. He leaped on each one, splintering it to fragments. At last he stood amid the wreckage, panting and grinning ferociously. Dr. Coote had paused halfway up the stairs and was sitting there, trying to gather strength to go up. He looked at the carnage with wry interest. Feel better now? He asked. I feel great, roared the professor. Charlie, thanks for shaking me up. I needed that. We may be two old geezers, but by God, we are two tough old geezers. Remember the Alamo? Remember the Maine? Remember my clothes? Said Dr. Coote forlornly. I am freezing my tail feathers. Professor Childermass helped Dr. Coote totter upstairs. In a few minutes, Dr. Coote was warmly bundled into thick gray flannel trousers, a soft blue flannel shirt, a bulky cable-knit black sweater, and his comfortable old brogans. Then he was hungry, so the professor helped him down to the kitchen. Professor Childermass hesitated a moment or two before he went to the basement to light the furnace. He remembered all too well the horrible zombie that had lurked there. But he gathered his nerve, went downstairs and got the furnace going, and took the time to investigate all the nooks and crannies. There was no zombie. He returned to the kitchen and rummaged through the larder and refrigerator. He decided that even Todd Lamort, whom he now regarded as a devil incarnate, could not do anything terribly evil to a sealed can of soup. So he heated 2 cans of Campbell's vegetable beef soup and got 2 squat brown bottles of Drury's, Dr. Coote's favorite beer, from the refrigerator. Dr. Coote perked up as he ate, and the professor felt much better after the meal, too. What do we do now? Dr. Coote asked as he pushed the bowl away from him. Well, we'll let awful Lamort have taken the boys. Ask me something else, growled Professor Childermass. Dr. Coote shook his head. Really, Roderick, I don't want to be cynical, but you should have known better after all, with a name like Todd Lamort. The professor clapped his hand to his head. Oh, by the hopeful hoplights of Hammurabi, he bellowed. Todd means death in Germany, and Lamort is death in French. How blind a bat can one old fool be? That fiend of a graduate student snookered me. If I had him here, I'd grind his bones to make my bread. The professor broke off, his angry expression becoming thoughtful. Wait a minute, he shouted. He dragged his wallet out and frantically dug through it, scattering things left and right. A colored photograph of his eccentric brother Humphrey, 2 ticket stubs from a movie he and Johnny had seen a year ago, a 1927 Vermont fishing license. And then he found it. He triumphantly waved a business card. The biter has been bit. Lamort gave me his telephone number. Armed with that information, the professor flew into action. He picked up Dr. Coote's phone and dialed the operator. After some bullying and a good deal of coaxing, he scribbled something on a piece of paper. He slammed the receiver down and exulted. He gave us his phone number, and now the phone company has given us his address." "Let's see," said Dr. Coote, holding out his thin hand. He frowned at the writing. Peculiar. Yeah, very peculiar. I know roughly where this is, but I can't think of any house on that road. It's near the old ruined colonial cemetery. Oh, of course. There is a deserted farmhouse there. It's little more than a tar paper shack." "That has to be it," replied the professor. "Mama Sinestra would want to be close to a boneyard to gather her evil forces." He pushed himself away from the table. "Let's go, Charlie. Time's a-wasting." Dr. Coote wearily shook his head. "Not so fast, Roderick. Settle down, and let's consider this rationally." "But the boys—" "The boys," said Dr. Coote in a firm voice, "will be all right as long as we have something that Mama Sinestra and Todd Lamort want. And we do. The drum, in case you have forgotten." Professor Childermass sank back in his chair. "Heavenly days, McGee, I had forgotten the cursed thing." "Yes," said Dr. Coote. "And if you can manage to listen for a minute, you may learn a thing or two. To begin with, before I found ill, I discovered some interesting bits of information about voodoo, and especially about the priests of the Midnight Blood." "Then tell me," said the professor. "And don't make me draw it out of you inch by inch, Charlie." Dr. Coote sipped his beer straight from the bottle and told a remarkable and sinister story. The priests of the Midnight Blood, he said, were a group of voodoo sorcerers led by none other than Corinne Legrand, or Legrande, better known as Mama Sinestra. Their symbol was a red drop of blood in a circle with a white teardrop-shaped highlight in the blood drop. The two superimposed shapes resembled the hands of a clock pointing straight up, a reference to the name of the group, the Midnight Blood Priesthood. These people had gained their wicked reputation on the island of St. Ives, and their diabolical name by sacrificing one human life a day for a whole year to the powers of darkness. 365 times they had slit the throats of their poor victims. Midnight after midnight they had spilled the innocent blood of men, women, and children to attract and gain control over demonic forces. And they had used their dark magic for many years to keep the Legrand family on the throne, because the priests of the Midnight Blood dealt with deadly forces. They were the leaders of the cult of the Baron Samedi. The Lord of the Dead could be summoned by the beating of drums. He had granted the abominable wishes of the priesthood. Under his rule, zombies walked by night, snuffing out the lives of all who opposed the harsh rule of General Legrand. However, a small resistance movement had begun after World War II, and Dr. Coote said that the young man who had given him the drum was no doubt a member of that resistance. The very morning I felt so dreadfully ill," Dr. Coote explained, "I had a phone call from the New Orleans police. They had discovered the body of a man who fit the description of the unfortunate young fellow who passed the drum along to me. He had a program from the academic conference in his pocket, and he had circled my name. The police say his body was, well, he had been savagely killed, and they discovered his name was Francois Devereaux, and he was until recently the valet of General Hippolyte Legrand of St. Ives." "I see," said Professor Childermass slowly. "The poor man absconded with the drum, and without the drum the priests could no longer do their dirty work. That is why the revolution in St. Ives against General Legrand has almost succeeded." "Has it?" said Dr. Coote, a dark satisfaction in his voice. "Good. But I also figured out why the drum was so important. Young Devereaux was taken over just before a big ceremony. Well, the Loa, the spirit of the Baron of the Dead, was in the drum. By the way, you told me you wondered why the vandals who ransacked my house didn't break anything. It was for a very good reason. They were afraid I had transferred this spirit into some object inside my house, and if they happened to break whatever housed the Loa, then the entity would burst forth in all his uncontrolled power. By accident, Fergie let just a little of that power out by beating the drum, and the result rocked your house to the foundation. Imagine what it could do if it burst out at full force, or if a genuine voodoo priestess pounded out her unholy rhythm on that prehistoric drumhead." Professor Childermass felt a chill, although the house was growing warmer by the minute. "Prehistoric?" With a bleak smile, Dr. Coote said, "I'll tell you more about that some other time. But the important thing is, I learned how to make the spirit in the drum absolutely helpless. You see, Loas have no power if they are in a river. Running water insulates them, turns them on their evil selves." "You chucked it in the river?" asked the professor. "Not quite." Dr. Coote rose. "Come with me. They went to Dr. Coot's bedroom and then into the bathroom. His toilet was the old-fashioned kind with a tank high on the wall and a lever with a chain attached that you had to pull to flush. At Dr. Coot's urging, the professor dragged a chair into the bathroom and climbed up on it. He took off the top of the toilet tank and thrust his arm inside, grimacing at the cold water. He hauled out something sealed in a waterproof oilcloth bag, something the size and shape of a large Dixie cup. No wonder the blasted toilet wouldn't stop dribbling, muttered the professor, stepping down. Of course it wouldn't, growled Dr. Coot. I used a nail to stick a hole in the flush ball. The water has to be running, remember? Professor Childermass groaned. And idiot that I am, I let Lamort stay here. It's lucky for us that he never investigated this drippy tank himself. It certainly is, responded Dr. Coot dryly. On the other hand, he probably never even thought of the tank as the equivalent of running water. After all, the drum is something that he would revere, and one doesn't think of revered objects in such unlikely places. The professor stood with the oilcloth packet dripping in his hands. Well, now that we have this, any suggestions? We have to save the boys, but I have a sneaky suspicion that if we turn this over to dear sweet Mama S, we're all gone gooses anyway. Geese, muttered Dr. Coot, who hated to hear words misused. We have to reach a bargain somehow and make it so binding that not even the evil priests of the Midnight Blood can break their word. Shall we go and see Toddlemort now? Just then the telephone rang. Professor Childermass narrowed his eyes. No one knows we're here, he said. I'll bet you my own phalanges against the 5 chunks of bone on this drum that the person calling us right now is either Toddlemort or Mama Sinestra. And that is the end of chapter 13.